us. With that, we move on to the next panel. I take pleasure in welcoming Shri Suresh Prabhu, who was also our Scotch Challenger awardee last year for the great work that he had done in reforms in serving country in the power sector and so many other areas. This is the next session which we have co-organized with help from another good friend of mine, Pradeep Mehta from Kutch International. This session is on Beyond Ease of Doing Business rankings. And Mr. Prabhu, who's known him for many, many years, has kindly consented not only to address this, but also give away the Scotch Challenger Award to Pradeep Mehta for his numerous contributions to competition policy in India. Sir, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce to you Mrs. Karuna Gopal. She is running a NGO called Futuristic Cities, and she's done enormous contributions in urban policy. So, Gursharan, may I ask you to kindly request you to read the citation from Pradeep, and then we'll go on to Mr. Prabhu conferring the award and speaking.
This year's Scotch Challenger Award for contributions to public policy on competition goes to Mr. Pradeep S. Mehta, a distinguished leader in Indian public policy. Pradeep S. Mehta was responsible for the institution of Kutch International in 1983. Ever since, he has worked single-handedly, picking up issues of great policy significance, ranging from trade, regulation, e-commerce, and competition, and successfully providing guidance and direction to policymaking. He is an ardent votary of promoting competition, which is vital to the economy. He believes that fair competition is one of the pillars to achieve India's economic targets, more so during this new normal. Congratulations.
Mr. Prabhu, I invite you to formally say that you confer the award on him, and then maybe your address, please.
Okay. So let me have a great honor and pleasure both to confer this award on such a distinguished personality and also such a celebrated award, because this has been conferred on someone who deserves it, but an institution which is actually selected him for award is also a very well-known, celebrated organization. So I think it's a double honor for me to do this. I really congratulate Pradeep Bhai for winning this award and look forward to his renewed contribution for bringing vibrancy to public policy space, even more than what he has been doing. So I think he's always such a rich experience, such a rich knowledge, and now again proven by the fact that he has such a grown white beard, so that shows that how much experience and knowledge he has got. So that is very clearly amplified by that. So all the best and congratulations to the winner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So would you like to address us on ease of
Sure.
Business rankings? Do you think
Definitely.
ease of living is more important?
Definitely. So let me once again congratulate the Scotch organization for doing something as good as this for so many years, selecting people and also working very closely with all the stakeholders. So I think I must congratulate Mr. Samir Kocher for doing this. And again, I already congratulate Pradeep Bhai, but my fellow panelists, including Ms. Rima Nanauti, Srinivas Rao, Manish Sabarwal, and many others will be speaking after me. So let me therefore speak before them, because they would have, otherwise, if I speak after them, there's nothing left for me to speak because they're so knowledgeable people. So let me congratulate once again Pradeep Bhai and all others. So actually, it's very interesting topic. So topic is Beyond Ease of Doing Business rankings. First of all, I've dealt with this subject as the Minister of Commerce and Industry. And the World Bank, which stipulates certain parameters on which they do ranking of various countries. And they have very clearly identifiable goalposts for achieving that. for example, construction permit, as they call it. In India, we don't call them construction permit, but this is what they call it globally. They'll call it honoring contracts, settlement of disputes, and many others. And based on that, they give this ranking globally. We started also doing that for the states in India, because at the end of the day, what happens with the states is ultimately going to be reflected in the country as a whole. So we are doing all this. But now today's topic is very interesting and which says beyond all this, right? That's what you mean. So actually, in one of investment summit which states organized, in which Honorable Prime Minister also on the dais, I was just speaking and I said, now we should go to not ease of doing business, but please of doing business. So this is what exactly what you mean beyond. So what is please of doing business? If you enjoy doing your business, that makes sense. You're doing business because particularly now when finding job is becoming more difficult, so you get self-employed. Then that self-employment turns into enterprise. Enterprise turns into some sort of a scaling up over a period of time, and that's how the business grows and starts. But that probably the first time you started doing it because you had no choice. You're forced to do it because there's no job, so you became self-employed. But suppose you make this entire economic activity into a pleasurable activity. People enjoy doing business. There are some people who become artists because they enjoy being artists. Of course, subsequently, you become so famous that you sell your art and you make so much money. So you get into business of art and culture. But you didn't start it like that. You started because you were enjoying it. Suppose we convert a possibility into a possibility of business, running a business becomes a pleasurable activity. So people enjoy doing business, and therefore the business will obviously be his hobby, his livelihood, his purpose of life. Can we do that? And that is what probably, Mr. Kocher, you mean when you say beyond ease of doing business ranking. So please of doing business, that was my, not ease, but please of doing business. And that is what I would told my officers in the ministry. So how do you do that? Firstly, if you want to bring pleasure into doing business, you have to reduce hassles in doing business. Because sometimes it's a hurdles race for an entrepreneur. He has to keep fighting the system all the time. He has to keep warding off various intervention in his business, the intrusion into his normal activity by so-called inspectors. And the inspection is for a price. So it becomes sometimes a harrowing experience for an entrepreneur to do business. So I told my officers, can you reduce all this unwarranted, unnecessary, intrusive restrictions on entrepreneurs? If you do that, if you remove the negativity, it may not still be a piece of doing business, but at least the people will no longer have a harrowing experience of doing that. And therefore, we must work on reducing unnecessary regulations from business. Entrepreneur take risk anyway. That's why you call him entrepreneur. Entrepreneur has to deal with so many uncertainties of life. Externalities, as you call them, are always there on which he has no control. And now the externalities have magnified. The pandemic was one proof of that. But the global challenges, global innovation, which happens in some faraway country can affect you in your domestic market. And all of this, therefore, adding to more uncertainty for an entrepreneur to deal with business. He has to keep tracking about technological innovation, which will make your business redundant. So he has to deal with all that any case. So why do you subject him to more rigors of doing business by bringing in regulation? So I set up a committee under then Secretary DIPP to remove all regulation. In fact, I used to always tell him we reduced quite a bit, but still I was not happy. I wanted to make sure that enterprise and entrepreneur will be able to do what he's best doing at, that is running his business. And we should allow him to do that with very broad parameters of the red lines that we'll draw, in which we'll say don't cross these red lines. For example, on environment, it's very important that we have a regulation on environment. Because when you're using natural capital, which does not belong to you alone, but society at large. So if you're drawing on that, you're depleting the natural resource, natural capital of the world, of the country, of the society. Therefore, that regulation is essential. There are certain social issues. You should not be harming the society at large. So their regulations are necessary. There are certain sensitivities, cultural sensitivities of a society. You should put regulation on that. So people know broadly what are the red lines in which I have to operate. And within those, he must have the full freedom of operation because he's putting his own money, borrowing, or investing his own capital as equity, leveraging it with more loans. So he's taking huge risk to run his business with the attendant externalities which I mentioned. So why do you subject him to the unnecessary regulation? The question therefore is, that regulation, can it come from market alone? Can market regulate his business? In a way, yes, market regulates. But markets are not always perfect. Now, the argument that Pradeep Bhai will make is make the market perfect. Yes, absolutely right. But as we always see, that even to make market perfect, you need regulation. But that's a different kind of regulation, not micro regulation, but macro regulation. That's fine. But I feel the pleas of doing business, one is to reduce this negativity. Other is honoring success stories, giving respect in society for those who run economic activities. See, the social values are very important. When you enjoy doing it is when people realize it. The best singer sings the best when there is an applause for his performance from those who are listening to him. The better, more enlightened are the ones who are going to listen to a singer. He will sing even better. So can we bring the new thoughts into society in which will recognize, reward, honor an economic entrepreneur? What does economic entrepreneur does actually? For his own good, he develops his own business, expands his business, and in the process he has to hire more people, either on his own payroll, or he creates a system whereby the more and more people get added to his longer and bigger economic ecosystem. Doing that, he's actually creating public good. The job of the state, the government, is to create jobs. He's creating that anyway. He's adding value by creating economic enterprise, which in turn pays taxes to the state. The tax in turn can even use that money, if done properly, for creating even higher public good. So why not we create a society in which entrepreneurs will get recognition, respect, honor, that will make them happy. So they'll enjoy doing business because they recognize. The other time, when India was the largest economy, a trader, a businessman, will have the audience of the court. He'll be honored by the emperor, by the king. That was not the days of democracy, so therefore I'm talking about the rulers. There are some rulers in the world who facilitated creating trade routes. And to guard those trade routes, they would keep the royal guards to ensure that the trader will be able to pass peacefully. They used to keep certain posts in different locations on the trade routes where the trader can rest. That was all done at state intervention. So the trader will then be free to do what he is best at, trading. He will be protected from all those forces which will actually hamper his trade. We really need to create that kind of environment in which people will start enjoying doing business, will be rewarded, recognized, and therefore will be feeling a different kind of reward that they get, not just by profits alone, not just return on the investment, not just by increasing the shareholders' value, but by doing something more coming it to him from the society. I think this is what I was thinking when I mentioned it just at that particular moment when I think it was an event in Assam when Prime Minister Modi and all top industrialists were on the dais. I had said, from ease of doing business, let's move to please of doing business. I think if you can bring that kind of a change, you can imagine the economic activity that will flourish in India. You can imagine the role of state, which first of all has to be completely redrawn, completely revisited, so that the enterprise becomes successful. But can you imagine how much rewards the state will get as a result of this? The best reward a state always expects from time immemorial is that the society at large is happy. There's a stories when the king would move out incognito into the people at night, changing his attire and looks so that he can get a feel about what people feel. Because his only desire was that people should be happy. But if you do it like this, it will be a completely changed scenario in which more and more people, as they're going to enter into new avenues of business, because the entire profile of employment globally is changing. There is no longer fixed term employment of a kind that was prevalent earlier. Therefore, people will have to be doing their business anyway. And if you make pleasure as driving force and people enjoy pleasure doing business, can you imagine the changes that will happen in society at large and people, the kind of people that will be creating? And that is what should be the vision. And that's all doable. I had started doing it actually, but long way to go. And we have to have different layers of government in the country. We have state, we have district, we have central. So I started working on a different idea. Can we not make district as hub of economic activity? And make ease of doing business at district first. Because ultimately the business happens in the district anyway. So if you make each district as best excellence of ease of doing business. People there, the district administration, state governments, and central government all are aligned to this overall objective and support that enterprise and entrepreneur. Can you imagine the change that will happen in the country? And I'd said that we can grow GDP by 3-4% more if every district GDP grows by 3-4% more. So I'd appointed National Council for Applied Economic Research and Indian Institute of Management to do this work. They had already prepared report. This work is already going on in the DPIIT. I just checked it the other way because we had selected 6 districts in all parts of India, east, west, north, south, and hilly district, for simple reason that this can happen a reality. I had also prepared a macro level plan at national level, $5 trillion, in which there was a sub-component, an important component was the district. So all that can happen. And each district has agriculture, services, and industry. So if you make for agriculture, ease of doing business, for services, for industry, it can really change the entire dynamics of India. I wish this happens soon. I offer my best wishes to Scotch again. I know when you talk about Scotch in the morning, it's different Scotch. We talk in the evening, it's a different Scotch. So I am sure we'll have the ease of doing business in the morning and please of doing business in the evening with a different kind of Scotch available to you. So thank you very much. All the best to you.
Thank you so much, Sureshji. As always, such a witty and such an insightful speech that you made. Pradeepji, would you kindly accept the award? Say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, and particularly to Suresh Bhai, my mentor, and somebody who I have admired since very long. One of our best possible ministers that we have had, and I hope that in the new cabinet, which might be reshuffled soon, you are taken back into the cabinet for doing what you are doing best, is to take your the country forward, which is what we hope to achieve. So this particular session is to continue with the narrative of making ease of business, as you said, to please of business. Thank you very much, Suresh Bhai and Samir, for this recognition, which I gladly accept. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradeepji.
Actually, just one line, Samir Bhai, just to add to this, is his contribution, Pradeep Bhai's contribution, as well as your own contribution to make please of doing business can never be underestimated. So you have done a great job, both of you. So I really feel that 2 pillars are here. So therefore, the please of doing business could become reality soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sureshji. We also have the pleasure of having with us under the radar lady, Karuna Gopalji, who's done a yeoman service. She's, I think, a part of BJP as well, but however, we don't celebrate political parties. We celebrate the work that she's been doing for public policy in urban affairs. Karunaji, would you accept the award and would you just kindly say a few words? You are on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samir and Scotch Group for recognizing my work. I have been working last 30 years, and when I created my Foundation for Futuristic Cities, a think tank almost 20 years ago, when the world was not even looking at urbanization, worked quite extensively all around the world. But this award really makes a lot of difference because it's given in India, and the brand that your award carries, recognition of true work and credibility attached to it. So I'm deeply honored and extremely grateful for this award. Thank you very much. I accept it.
Congratulations again, Karunaji. Pradeep, over to you. Now it's your panel and your panelists. Look forward to a very invigorating discussion. We though still a little short on time, but we are extending it by 5 minutes. So 13:40, if you could kindly conclude it, it would be very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Samir. And thank you, Suresh Bhai, once again. Now, the enabling ease of doing business with particular focus on small, medium, and women-led enterprises is essential to usher in inclusive economic development of India, and particularly now that the economy is gasping and needs an economic vaccine, kind of vaccine which can help growth, go forward. And we think that this is the right time, and this is what we have appealed to the Prime Minister and all the chief ministers. An important point, Suresh Bhai, is that this is something which has to be done as a concerted and a united effort across the country, and it cannot be done only from Delhi. So this is the appeal that we've made to all the chief ministers and as well as the Prime Minister is, how do we look at the opportunity which is available? I mean, you always look at changes to be done when you come across a crisis, and a crisis like this is an ideal opportunity to make ease of business as something which will help to create jobs, which is what we are doing. Now, we are aware, as you've said, that we have been working with the World Bank on the rankings of ease of doing business. As a result, we moved to 63rd position from 142nd position in the last 6 years. And this exercise has been further filtered down to our states through the business reform action plan, under which different states are ranked in business reforms they claim to have implemented. The exercise, though commendable in spirit, falls short in inclusivity and representativeness. This is what our finding is. The end result is that climbing charts has become an end in itself, and the stated objective of making life easier for entrepreneurs appears to have taken a backseat. We still require a lot of effort to be done. Now, transformation steps are required if we have to reap the full benefits of ease of doing business reforms. First, there is a need to be cognizant of the limitations of doing business rankings. It appears that a top-down approach has hitherto been adopted to design the indicators and review progress. The indicators have traditionally measured ease of starting a business, while most challenges faced by businesses are in their day-to-day functioning, what we define as ease of running a business, which is becoming more and more difficult than starting a business. Now, consultation with the industry during the design of indicators is rare and insufficient. As a result, the focus is on whether the so-called reforms are felt and not on the challenges faced by businesses and measures required to address them. We have also realized that informal entrepreneurs, the thelawalas, etc., and the micro, small, and medium enterprises and women entrepreneurs bear a disproportionate burden of regulatory compliance, which includes police hafta, for example. They are required to run from pillar to post to even obtain simple clearances and approvals. And that is where Samir pointed out in terms of ease of living. So when you look in terms of small and micro entrepreneurs, for them, their businesses are livelihoods. And therefore, ease of living is equally important as ease of doing business. Even after digitization, owing to their limited capacity, small industries and women-led enterprises often fall prey to intermediaries and are required to pay or incur significant cost in form of commission, quote unquote, to ensure compliance. Thus, dedicated efforts are required to make life easier for them. In addition, enterprises are often expected to do business in face of unpredictable, inconsistent, overlapping regulatory requirements, which my fellow panelist Manish Sabharwal has defined so well as regulatory cholesterol. You can well imagine what it means. It has been observed that information regarding EODB reforms is not effectively disseminated to the industries. The problem again then persists more at the lower level of MSMEs and women-led enterprises who lack information regarding relevant policies and regulations that are in place and thus resort to middlemen to fulfill even very simple procedures. I'll give you an example. The other day I went to get my driving license renewed, and you won't believe me that there was no way that I could go to the counter and get it done. I had to go through a middleman. It's become institutionalized, the whole system. And thus there is a need to recognize that the precious state capacity and resources needed to be spent judiciously to actually facilitate running of business and not merely on papers. Now, as Suresh Bhai pointed out, and as Samir also said, we've been doing a lot of work on this in this particular area, and also in association with SKOCH Foundation and Manish Sabharwal's outfit. Now, what we have proposed is to have a regulatory guillotine framework in place, which provides an opportunity to get rid of useless regulations. Now, there again, we have suggested a three-way test for useless regulations. One is, does it come from a primary law regulation? Does it achieve the intended objective? And lastly, does the cost it imposes on stakeholders outweigh the benefits realized? Or let me put it the other way, does the benefit to the state exchequer justify the cost which is incurred by the business? I mean, there's no point taxing them and then losing the benefit. Now, this three-way test would, of course, require a systematic, transparent, and inclusive consultation process with stakeholders. Only those approvals that pass all three tests need to be retained, and the rest will need to be abolished or amended. Several countries have been, and this is something what we are suggesting is not something out of our head, but this has been happening in many countries. For instance, in Kenya, 315 licenses have been eliminated and 379 licenses have been simplified using this framework in a recent effort. Countries like Moldova, which is the poorest European country, Ukraine, Serbia, Mexico, and Russia have also benefited from the regulatory guillotine framework. Annual savings of 188.7 million euros were estimated to the Serbian economy, a very small country. However, the regulatory guillotine framework will address the issue of existing regulatory stock by reducing the suboptimal regulations, approvals, and clearances. There is also a need to address the issue of regulatory flow, that is, ensuring that suboptimal regulations, approvals, and clearances are not introduced in future. To this end, India needs to adopt a one-in, two-out policy. Tell the policymaker you want to bring in a regulation, fine. We bring in one regulation, get two out. Cut out two, if at all you want this to be done. Now, this would require institutionalizing what we call regulatory impact assessment. This is another area that we've been working upon for a long time, and we hope that Niti Aayog will take this forward soon. Several countries have adopted and benefited from the RIA. The one-in, two-out policy of UK, for example, which mandates removal of £2 of costs for imposition of £1 of cost via state-led intervention, has resulted in a net reduction of £836 million in cost to business between 2010 and 2014, within 5 years. A similar initiative was adopted in the US, which reportedly resulted in regulatory cost saving of US $8.1 billion in 2017. It is my firm belief that adoption of regulatory guillotine and regulatory impact assessment framework can go a long way in taking the ease of business doing initiatives in India to the next level. It is in this context that we wish to discuss the potential ways to achieve the ease of doing business reforms, going beyond the ranking system, to get beyond the rankings. In today's discussion, we have with us three eminent personalities who are best suited to deliberate upon the next phase of reforms beyond ease of doing business ranking, and how could practices like RIA, regulatory impact assessment, be adopted in India. I will be posing a question to each of the panelists, and I request the panelists to address that question in the span of about 5 to 7 minutes, considering that we have limited time, and we would like some public discussion as well, Q&As to come. So let me start with Mr. Manish Sabharwal, the founder of TeamLease. We have witnessed some efforts by the Indian government to actualize EODB reforms. However, despite such efforts, the situation on the ground remains grim, and entrepreneurs face immense hurdles in establishing as well as running the business. What specific measures should be taken to ensure that the reforms translate into action for the entrepreneurs? Additionally, what type of incentive or disincentive incentive structure can be designed for bureaucrats to ensure routine update of the laws and monitoring of its impact. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think that the challenge we have is that most of us acknowledge that a modern state is a welfare state. But people sort of confuse a welfare state with a place which is difficult to do business. So Sweden, Norway, Finland actually have a tax to GDP ratio which is twice of India. So they have a very large state, but they are also 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, and 9 in the ease of doing business ranking. So their freedom for entrepreneurs funds a very interesting welfare state. And I think that is where the legitimacy of ease of doing business has not taken off. I mean, we're finally fighting a battle for ideas that the accounting of accountability, did you follow rules and process, is different from the account of accountability, is did you do the right thing. So I would say that India is a difficult, or ease of doing business in India is difficult for 3 reasons. One is the thought world of civil servants. One is the prohibited till permitted. Drunk driving is an argument against cars. And then you obviously design the law for the chore or the thief. So these are fundamental thought worlds which are instinctive sometimes with civil servants. The other reason is the 3 defects among the players. So the government has an execution deficit, the private sector has a trust deficit, and nonprofits have a scale deficit. So if you look at the reaction either in the agricultural bill to create more space for the private sector or RBI's proposal in banks, then you think that every Indian entrepreneur deserves their own episode in Bad Boys Billionaire or something like that, which is not true. I mean, I don't think every Indian entrepreneur deserves. Some of them do, and they should go to jail. But the trust deficit with the private sector drives the regulatory cholesterol. And the third one, which is really attention to detail, the decline of human capital in the civil services, the short tenures that people face. So basically the incentive system that they face. Really, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose, as Mario Cuomo used to say. But, ease of doing business is not poetry, it's prose. So the 67,000 compliances, 6,700 filings, which changed 8 times last year, are all in the nature of prose. So somebody has to sit down and detail out, do you need this compliance? Do you need this filing? And I don't think that exercise is fully completed yet. It has begun to gather momentum in the last 1 year as this idea that, yes, ease of doing business rankings have improved, but the daily life of entrepreneurs. I have 140 guys in regulatory affairs whose only job is handling the regulatory cholesterol. I mean, as a large company, I can probably afford it, but small companies can't. And everybody loves to idealize MSMEs, but they make life miserable for MSMEs. I mean, if every law needs to be interpreted. But more importantly, if there are transmission laws between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced, which is really what India has. How the law is written, nobody gives a damn about. How it is interpreted, practiced, and enforced, then you are giving an unfair advantage to big companies like me, because we will know how to interpret and practice and enforce laws differently than how they are written, while MSMEs will not know that. So if you idealize MSMEs, ease of doing business is not a project for the Birlas, Tatas, or HDFC or Team Leads. They are a project for India's 63 million enterprises, or whatever way you want to measure enterprises in India. So I think there's one long-term solution. The actual only long-term solution is civil service reform. We don't, that is fundamentally, you will never get India to be a great place to do business unless you do civil service reform. So we don't need 52 ministries in Delhi. I mean, Japan only has 8, the US has 14, UK only has 22. So 52 ministries by definition reduces ease of doing business. And being so top heavy, we have 250 people in Delhi with the rank of Secretary to Government of India. We don't need 250 secretaries to Government of India in one city. India can't be run from Delhi. Indira Gandhi was wrong when she said that strong states lead to a weak nation. China's genius was, and well, N.T. Ramarao was wrong also when he said that the central government is a conceptual myth and, states, chief ministers run India. So we need life somewhere in between. But I think civil service reform is the only long-term solution. So whether we introduce the colonel threshold of the army, whether we introduce, I mean, 98% of people in our civil services are ranked outstanding officially. That's mathematically impossible. So we can't have all our civil service outstanding and have the outcomes we do. So fundamentally, the short-term solution that I propose means nothing if the long-term solution of civil service reform is not done. But the short-term solution is just a compliance commission with the single 90-day, 180-day mandate to take an axe, rationalize, decriminalize, and digitize India's compliance infrastructure. So you need to take an axe, 50%, 70% of the compliances and filings need to go. You need to decriminalize them. The 18,000 ways that out of the 67,000 compliances, more than 18,000 of them prescribe jail. One of my favorite lines in the Vishnu Sahasranam says, ask, why did God create fear? So that he could take it away, right? The only reason to decriminalize something is to be able to take it away, because if you don't take it away, then you can be corrupt. So I would say rationalization, decriminalization, and digitization are the three short-term solutions, but the only long-term solution is civil service reform. But I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Manish, this is something which is a root problem, which is what I have been also saying, that whatever you want to do, unless you have administrative reform, nothing is going to move forward. And it is only problem is that it is only getting worse now, administrative structure. I just to give you an example, a friend of mine in the IS told me that now 90% of the IS officers are corrupt. What used to be 10%, and the whole thing is shifted. Secondly, the important point which you raise and which requires a little more discussion is that how do you bring in trust? The problem is that there's a lack of trust, which is what we are witnessing even in the farm sector agitation, which is going on at a particular moment, because farmers just don't have any trust in the government, and it goes on and on. That we've been advocating the same reforms for a long time on the basis of research we've done. But let me move on now to Mr. Srinivas Rao, the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. Mr. Srinivas Rao, the question that I would like to ask you is, it's common knowledge that MSMEs are most vulnerable entities in an industrial ecosystem. How are the challenges of MSMEs different from the large-scale enterprises? Manish spoke about large-scale enterprises, and he did highlight the fact that it is easier for large-scale enterprises to often deal with these issues because they have the necessary staff and the deep pockets. Now, what specific measures would you suggest to make life easy for small and medium and micro entrepreneurs, particularly, as I had said in my opening remarks? Over to you, Mr. Rao.
Thank you, Mr. Pradeep. And Manish is always a hard act to follow, so I'll try and do my best. Okay, so I think so. Let's just step back and look at the MSME landscape, right? So when you think about it, according to again the Ministry of MSME, we have 63 million MSMEs in India, employing about 110 million people, right? So that's one data point I want you to think about. The second data point I'm going to talk about is, let's look at the number of entities which are registered for GST, right? So according to, this is data from July, so may have changed a little bit. We have approximately about 10 million enterprises now registered for GST, right? And which means typically 40 lakh plus revenue, except in the Northeast states where it's 10 lakhs. And the third data point I'm going to talk about is the number of entities registered for PF, right? So if you use PF and GST as two measures of formality, right? So the number of enterprises registered for PF again is approximately about 654,000, right? Give or take a few here and there, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you the vast majority of MSMEs, I said 63 million, right? 6.3 crores. So you're talking of less than 15% paying GST, one, and you're talking of about 10% or thereabouts having PF. So which means many of these firms are stuck in low growth, low productivity, don't generate enough jobs, don't really add value to the economy, right? I think part of the problem, when you think about it, can be traced back to this issue of becoming formal, right? So let's think about it from the point of view of a So I come from the city of Bangalore. Okay, so where, as you know, is the IT capital, and so I've been an entrepreneur twice over. So I can just share some data points from that. So if you want to start from a tax compliance standpoint, you have approximately, just from a tax compliance standpoint, approximately 155 compliances to deal with on an annual basis. So which is almost, every 2 days there's some, in a manner of speaking, many of them obviously are monthly and quarterly, and some of them are half yearly, and some of them are annual. So essentially we have a very complex environment for MSMEs, right? So what does this mean? So what happens is essentially what does it mean for an MSME? So firms decide to stay informal, right? And this then becomes a vicious cycle. Because you're informal, you can't access capital. Because you can't access capital, you can't increase productivity. Because you can't increase productivity, you remain basically stunted and don't grow at all, right? And let's also look at the direct and indirect costs. So we have been working very closely with Manish and his team, and we're working very closely with them on a long engagement in the state of Punjab. And we've done a study. The first part of the study, we've tried to capture what is the direct and indirect cost of compliance for an MSME, right? And we've come up with a number of 12 lakhs, right? When you think about it, where does that go? So you have to have a CA, you need somebody to handle your PF, somebody to help you with your GST, etc. So think of a small firm employing, let's say, anywhere between 5 to 50 people. If you have your annual cost of compliance is 12 lakhs, that's a huge disincentive for you to be formal, right? So I just wanted to make that point. So I think there are ways there are obviously significant impacts which would happen if we have a less complex compliance landscape. I think first of all, I think you'll have more businesses which become formal, more businesses which will scale and which will grow. And I think from a measurement standpoint, and I just, because this is something you talked about RIA and so on, Mr. Mehta, but I think clearly one of the things I think, and a lot of these ease of doing business rankings, when you think about it from the entrepreneur standpoint, right? So first of all, how many compliances am I dealing with today? And is that number of compliances reducing year on year, right? I'm as an MSME, I'm time challenged, right? Because I'm obviously trying to just stay alive, and particularly in post-COVID times. So how much time do I spend on this compliance part, right? And also ease of doing business should also focus on other things, like for example, how long does it take for me to get my TDS refund? How long does it take to get my power permissions in place, etc. So I think if we look at it slightly differently, not just look at it from the point of view of perspective of large businesses. And for example, I think the BRAP is a good positive step in the right direction, but there's a lot of work to be done on the ground. And the last but not the least is focus on reducing the cost of compliance. So if we can do these four things, which is what is the overall compliance burden? What is the time taken today? How much is the time reducing year on year? Can we measure and reduce the time it takes for an MSME to get the tangible inputs to be able to scale his business? And last is cost of compliance. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rao. And I, in the 1970s, I was also a small-scale entrepreneur. And believe you me, it was a superman's job. I was the chairman of the company and the labor welfare officer also. I had to handle 2 long strikes. So there were, one day I and my partner sat down and counted 52 inspectors. This includes where we were covered under a particular law, or even if we were not covered. So we used to get inspectors from departments with whom we were not concerned coming for Diwali bakshish and so on. Anyway, let me leave it at that. But I can well understand, you've been an entrepreneur, so have I been. So one can understand as to where the problems are. Let me now move on to Reema ji, Chief Executive Officer of SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Entrepreneurs Organization. And we all have witnessed one of the worst COVID-19 crisis affected groups is women. And women entrepreneurs have traditionally faced immense challenges in running a business. Can you highlight some challenges and possible solutions which can be institutionalized to address the challenges? Over to you, Reema.
Sure. Thank you so much, and congratulations, Pratibha, to you for the Scotch Award as well. And it was very fascinating to hear pleas of doing business to administrative or civil service reforms to Mr. Srinivas Rao talking about the compliances, the cost of compliances. And then I was just telling myself that if large companies and strong entrepreneurs like Manish Bhai and Srinivas Bhai are having such a harrowing time, uh, what would be the situation of women workers, women entrepreneurs, enterprises in the informal sector who are cooperatives or federations or social enterprises who are then trying to formalize themselves or going to scale. And I think COVID has really impacted them very badly. It is these enterprises or these women entrepreneurs are still struggling to have their feet grounded. Their businesses are still, not picking up the way one would. And I think one of the reasons and one of the major reasons is that the kind of relief packages that the government has announced, which are mainly, loans. And loans normally work when the economy of a nation is functioning and is strong. But we all know that, our country's economy is currently fractured. And in a fractured economy, women entrepreneurs are thrown to the margins or completely thrown out. And that's one of the major reasons why the women entrepreneurs or enterprises which are owned and managed by the women are really struggling hard to really come back to and get into the business. One of the major things that we find is also the banking system, having access to finance. If you really want your enterprise as a women entrepreneur, as a social enterprise owned by women, it is very quick and easy access to finance. If I want to take a debt from the bank, I have to fill up a form which is 30 long pages. It asks for so many different documents. And if you are talking about rural enterprises, I think it's just next to impossible. Similarly, even if you want to have a relief package and access to a relief package, you have to present so many different documents. It's an entitlement. You have announced a relief package, it's an entitlement. And why do you need so many different documents? And that's where, again, not just the trust deficit of the large private sector, but it's also the trust deficit between the government and the people who are entitled to those relief packages. The third and the most important, I think, is, what is needed is a kind of a recovery fund. And that is not a new kind of financing instrument. The governments really need to think out of the box. The financial institutions need to think out of the box. And our experience has shown that when it comes to women entrepreneurs, women enterprises, the recovery, the repayment rates are phenomenal, almost 99 to 100%. And therefore, there is a need for a new kind of financing instrument, and that ensures a minimum income to the household. And then only we would be able to have a thriving economy. And the most important is that how do you build local decentralized supply chains? Our experience during COVID has shown that it was these local decentralized supply chains that functioned and that continued giving employment through the social enterprises. So therefore, I think it's now time that countries like ours have to think of a new economic pathway, a pathway that builds an economy of nurturance. When Mr. Suresh Prabhu was talking about pleas of doing business, I think we have to think of an economy of nurturance. You don't build your businesses at the cost of somebody else's businesses. Also, where do you invest? What kind of businesses one needs to invest? And I think we need to invest in businesses that bring better environment, that brings better health, that brings better nutrition, that helps on building up the local skills and traditions. And that's a kind of an economy. Unless and until we build that kind of an economy, which is nurturing, I don't think that the country will be able to reach a 3 trillion or a 5 trillion economy. It's these entrepreneurs in the rural areas, in the informal sector, which also should be able to build and have a thriving, a vegetable vendor or a fruit vendor, or any, for that matter, any vendor. Do they have a ease or a please of doing business? They are still seen as encroachers. They are still seen as obstructing traffic. Where are the natural markets for them? Where are the town planning? Where is a space for them in the town planning or the city planning when it happens? So unless and until we develop a new economic pathway of building an economy of nurturance, taking the need of each and every entrepreneur of the country, that they also are included and have the opportunity to build their own entrepreneurship and their enterprise, I don't think we will be able to solve the problem of unemployment in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reemaji. I mean, when you talk in terms of economy and nurturing, it's a splendid idea. I can see a parallel of that which is already happening in the country today, is how in the accounts of the poor people, money is being transferred from the center to help them to overcome the crisis that we have seen now. So it is not as if there is no such precedent in the country, and what you said is right. Secondly, I think importantly, you raised a point, and that is my own personal experience. We run 1,500 self-help groups in the district of Chittorgarh in Bhilwara in southern Rajasthan. And we've seen the credit worthiness of the women is fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, except for one or two fraudulent groups, all of them their repayment is 100%. They're sort of very conscious of the fact is that they have to do this, and including they're growing. Many of them are growing fantastically. They never got the opportunity in the past, is to see now it is happening. With that, may I, Samir, are you there? Gursharan.
Yes, I'm there.
Can we open the floor? Because the question answer I see is generally talking about some voting rather than on the topic that we're discussing.
Well, you can open up the floor, of course.
Yeah, the floor is open for anybody to raise a question through the Q&A box.
Pradeep, looks like no questions for you.
Okay, is there a poll, is it?
Yeah, this is a poll on the panel.
Oh, on the panel, right.
What the people think.
Good. So may I request the audience to please fill in the poll which is there in front of you. Should ease of living ranking be given higher priority than ease of business ranking? The first question. The second is, does India need to learn from other countries and reform required ease of doing business? We've got one question from Prashant Tak. He says that while the idea of civil service reforms has been spoken about for a long time, Manish, can you suggest a bonus malus system?
I'm actually a little hesitant, even in the question about bonuses for civil servants.
Analysis.
Yeah, that would be a little, you don't need to be paid to do your job. Bonuses, even in the private sector, we are all realizing that you corrupt your compensation systems when you pay people bonuses to do their job. Bonuses are above and beyond the call of duty. And civil servants, and I hope people don't interpret my civil servants to be the 4,762 IAS officers. There are actually 20 million civil servants. And that's really whom I'm talking about. The IAS officers are obviously important because they set the tone from the top. And I would probably not agree with your IAS officer assessment that 90% of them are corrupt, but obviously, yes, many more of them
recent
are.
batches.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, my view is that that's probably not that true, but there still is a lot of idealism among the people who join the IAS. They do join for the civil services. I think we have to think about the culture of the civil servants. We have to think about the control. We have to think about performance management. So I don't think a bonus is a good idea for ease of doing business. I think creating a fear of falling and hope of rising. Every organization has a currency that we trade in. We obviously know that people like to be Home Secretary, Finance Secretary, and Defense Secretary rather than, say, Textile Secretary or something like that. So I think that postings, promotions, trainings are very huge currency available for civil service performance management, and they are currently not used. So training, postings, and promotions should be done, and that could be a place to start. Because if you get into a debate of financial incentives for most civil service jobs can't be done in 1 or 2 years. They're they don't have only 1 or 2 variables. So in the private sector, our goals are finite and our timeframes are finite. In the public sector, timeframes are infinite and goals are multiple. So I'd be careful with drafting incentive systems that start paying people for short term. There's the Godard's law, where if the metric becomes a goal, the metric is no longer useful. And you've seen that happen in many government programs.
Pradeep, just to share an interesting insight with you, we just conducted a poll on this.
Yeah.
Does bureaucracy need incentives to pursue reforms?
Right.
Our audience size is 937. 398, which is 60%, says yes, they should be incentivized. 16% say no, 108. And 24% say can't say, which is 158. So
Manish,
people are listening and they are giving their feedback.
Manish, I think the thinking is different than yours.
Fair enough. I have seen the unintended consequences of financializing civil services.
But
We have seen the unintended consequences of financializing the economy. Public service I think we should pay our civil servants well, but I'm not sure we are yet ready as a society. See, we don't live in an economy, we live in a society. I think we have 10 other tools to get performance out of civil servants, but obviously on average, we should pay them enough so that they don't need to be corrupt to live. I have no problems with that.
Yeah, in all fairness, Manish, the audience is largely civil servants.
That's okay. I think most of them.
So they think they should be incentivized.
No, I think there is no right answer to this.
Basically, it's a call for another pay commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a complex debate even in the private sector on how
I ask a
good
question
variable pay works.
to Mr. Srinivas Rao. Mr. Srinivas Rao, Mr. Prabhu spoke about EODB at the district level. How can we start thinking about it? And how do we build state capacity to do that?
Sure. So I think 2 things. So I think, and again, I'm going to reference the engagement we are doing in Punjab. So basically, we are working closely with the Punjab government in 2 districts, Ludhiana and Chandigarh, right? And we're working closely with the DICs, the district industry commissioners, right? So 2 things, right? One of the things is many of these, the entrepreneurs, what we've tried to do is to create an MSME advisory council, because one of the things we recognize is both from the government side as well as from the entrepreneur perspective, they're all they're poles apart in terms of how they think about the regulations, compliances, and filings. And unfortunately, at the risk of making something slightly controversial, unfortunately, the government, while intentions are laudable, sometimes execution capacity is a challenge. And also, I think it's fair to say sometimes they don't understand the implications of some of these regulatory changes on the entrepreneurs on the ground, right? Particularly, when you think about COVID, right? If you just think about what an MSME would have gone through in the last, let's say, last 10, 11 months, right? Lockdown, first of all, not able to get goods to market, reverse migration of labor, etc., etc. Their ability to overcome this is a challenge. So I think while it's fair to say that the district should be the central point, I think one of the things we are suggesting, and I think it's fair to say that the idea is starting to gain currency in government, is to figure out almost the equivalent of a time and motion study, which is to say, why is something being done? Why, for example, if you take Punjab, you have this thing called the Right to Business Act, right? Despite that, the offtake of the Right to Business Act has been low. The number of registrations under that has been very low because the government has not done enough, for example, to visibly publicize and let people know that something like this, where you can get registrations for a bunch of things pretty much across the counter, no inspections for 3 years, they haven't really been able to go out and get visibility for that. So I think, yes, the district is you might say the smallest unit. Actually, you have to go down even below the district. You have to go down to a taluk, etc. But district is a good start point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Reema ji, the last word to you. Reema ji, are you there?
I think since I'm getting the last word, let us hope that whether we go down up to the district level or to the block level, but I think what is needed is a whole new thinking that how do we prepare ourselves to make the future of work and future of for workers much more easier and much more conducive. So I hope that we are able to see an economy of nurturance in our country come life sooner and not later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we come to an end of this session. And
thank you
Sameer,
so much, Pradeep. Thank you to all the panelists. Reema ji, so nice to see you virtually again.
I know, after a long time. Thank you.
I hope we correct that. Manish ji, I am very long-standing admirer of your work, and I'm thankful to Pradeep that he managed to get you on the panel. I hope to interact with you more. And
Manish is an inspiration to me.
he's an inspiration to a lot of people. So
No,
maybe you could help me with and I'll pick his brains.
Yeah.
So with that, we come to the conclusion of this session.